Making it happen, and we so passionate.
That's right.
With dental training, growing your dental practices every single day. Gotta keep rising, be a better version of you. We call it Kaizen. Yeah, practice biopsy. Going up, no stopping. Yeah, practice biopsy. Let's go.
Hey, Practice Biopsy, D'Angelo here today with another awesome guest on the podcast. We've got Wes here, and I've been a fan of his stuff for a really long time. I was just telling him before we turned on the recording that I followed his stuff, and I'm honored to be able to finally talk face to face. So I'm going to have some questions today about leadership, which I kind of consider Wes an expert in. He's going to talk a little about his journey to becoming a better leader, and hopefully give us some advice, some stories, some anecdotes, tips, and strategies so we can be better leaders in our own lives as well. So Wes, go ahead and tell the audience a little bit about where you practice, where you're at, and how you went down the rabbit hole of learning to become a better leader.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here as well. I've also followed your stuff forever. So, and honestly, I can't consider myself an expert. I don't pretend to be an expert, but I started leading in dentistry to give me a place to basically an outlet, so I didn't have to tell my wife like every sentence that I say to her starts with. So I was listening to this podcast, and so if I listen to a lot of podcasts, I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and leadership has fascinated me forever. But we'll get a little bit more into that later. I am from Colorado. I did dental school in Southern California at Western University, and then spent 4 years in the Army at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas. If you've heard of Fort Leavenworth, that's where the military prison is. So I did work at the prison. That was super interesting time to start my career right around COVID in a prison, which was awesome. And then along the way, I fell in love with leadership. I've always wanted to get involved with practice ownership, something I've always wanted to do. And right now I'm still an associate. And a number of reasons for that. But I started leading in dentistry specifically before I got into practice ownership, because the whole message is I really want people to know that you don't have to wait until you're in charge to be a leader. You can take ownership over your domain. You can take leadership and ownership over what it is that you do over your position, regardless of who you are in the dental office. And there's so many resources for business owners, the dentists, but there's not very many resources out there for associates, assistants, office managers, hygienists, that kind of thing. So I know there's a lot out there, but focusing on specifically leadership, that's really my angle where I want to come at it. Just to share a lot of things that I've come across and things that have worked for me, but then also to help people, tap into something that they've wanted to do and don't really know how to get into it.
Nice, man. What in your journey to leadership, talk about like the evolution of that. Like, has it been a slow and steady process? Has there been like one thing that, like, whether you heard it on a podcast or you read it in a book and it like clicked and it made a big difference for you, or was it just a slow evolution in every sense of the way?
Great question. So leadership has been something I've always been interested in, like all the way down to being a kid in like fourth grade, getting involved with student government, student council, that kind of thing. And I did that all the way through high school. My parents were very big on helping push us into leadership positions. And I just knew there was something different about being a leader, the influence that you can have over other people. And as I got involved with different projects and things over a number of years, there was always me doing the job or doing the skill or doing the thing that I was supposed to be doing, but also helping other people do better at what they were doing too. I guess a very clear way to explain that, there's this lady named Liz Wiseman. She has a book called Multipliers, and she talks about how if you're doing a thing, you're adding value. But if you are helping other people to do the thing better, you're multiplying value. And so I just found that I could multiply my value and make my efforts go farther if I was able to help other people to do the same thing. So that's kind of what got me involved with like my own personal leadership, right? Learning more things about it. And then what I came to realize was helping other people to be better leaders is like, it's multiplying the multiplication. So it's like, you're not just doing your efforts, you're helping multiply your value. But if you can build other leaders, then you help them multiply value as well. And so for me, that's kind of where my heart's at. I love I love dentistry. I think teeth are cool, but really people are where it's at. And over the course of my career, I hope that I look back and say, I was able to make an impact on other people. It's something that we chatted a little bit about before we started recording, was your affinity for teaching as well, right? Like there's something about passing on something that you've learned. And again, not to pretend to be an expert, but to say, this is what worked for me. And if it can work for you too, great. And then you leave some sort of small little legacy about how to do a certain thing or to be a certain way. If you can pass it on to somebody else, they're able to pass it on as well. And it just becomes this effect. So
Yeah.
I really
Yeah,
like
and
that
it's like
idea.
you add another step to the staircase so everyone can go a little bit higher.
Exactly.
That's one of my favorite quotes, and it's actually a quote on the back of my book that I authored
Yeah.
by Isaac Newton. If I've seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants, and I think that really applies to this concept of not being the expert who knows everything, but being a person who learned something, had something that worked for them, sharing it,
Mhm.
and hoping that it helps someone else as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something like really deep about that and really philosophical. You can get a little cheesy when we start talking about it too deep, but I think in leadership there's a certain aspect to it. The cheesiness helps you access something that
Yeah,
you might
sometimes it
not be able
does.
to access otherwise. I mean, I love cheesy quotes. I love cheesy metaphors and analogies and stories, and it really helps. It really helps get to the meat of what you're trying to share or teach or anything like that. So, as a teacher, I'm sure you understand.
It's so important.
Yeah.
How do you judge, whether in yourself or someone you're coaching on leadership, how do you judge or measure if they're actually becoming a better leader? Like, is it like
Yeah,
getting more compliments from the people around you? Like,
sure.
what's the benchmark for, am I actually a better leader than I was 6 months ago?
Great question. This is something I'm super excited to talk about. Didn't see this question coming, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Mhm.
Um, the reason I think that we are attracted to measurement is, as dentists, we measure everything, right? We're going to measure metrics are what we talk about all day long. And we have different practice management softwares in order to dive into the metrics, put them on a dashboard, make it easy to understand so we can figure out how to improve our reappointment rate or our case acceptance. But how do we improve what our leadership is? If there was a dental intel or a practice by numbers or something like that that would allow you to dive into who you are as a person and who you are as a leader, that would be ideal. So with leading in dentistry, like I said, I started it to help develop the leadership skills of every member of the dental team, not just the business owner. And the best way that I found to do that is to quantify where your leadership's at. If you just say be a better leader or go and develop leadership skills, it's too vague. It's too nebulous. You can't really dial in what that means.
Mhm.
So for me, I developed what I call the teach leadership model because it's all focused on teaching, passing things along. And the teach leadership model is made up of 5 pillars. So it's trust, expectations, accountability, consistency, and heart. So again, that's trust, expectations, accountability, consistency, and heart. And if you are able to break different parts of leadership up into specific skills and you work on those skills, then you can know you're becoming a better leader. So what I do, the first thing I did before I really started doing any sort of course or anything like that was develop a leadership skills assessment. And so I worked with a couple of folks that I went to dental school with, just sent them a survey to their teams, worked with them to get their team's phone numbers so I could text them a link to a survey. They go through and answer 25 questions, 5 for each category, on trust, expectations, accountability, consistency, and heart. And then they could get an anonymous response or feedback from their team, basically like a 360 survey about where their leadership skills were in the eyes of their team. And then I did the same thing with the docs to see where they self-assessed. And then we could compare and see, your team said this and you said that, where's the difference? So where do you see that you need to improve? And is it the same as what they're saying? It was super interesting to be able to quantify what that was. And then the idea behind, now I'm doing a 90-day leadership development program. So you take one of those self-assessments and a team assessment in the beginning if your team's on board for doing it, if you want to do it with your team, and then do the 90-day program. And at the end, do it again and see where you developed and how you changed. So it is very difficult to quantify what it is, but if you can have a way to grasp it and then focus on specific skills to develop trust, to set expectations, to hold people accountable, and then do that with consistency and with a certain level of heart and passion. That for me is what will take someone from being where they are now to a better leader in the future.
I like that. I didn't think you'd actually have an answer for a way that it would be quantifiable, but sounds like you kind of do have one.
And it's not
Yeah,
really, but that's as close as I've been able
it's
to
the
come.
closest that I've seen. I mean, I
Yeah,
haven't seen anything closer, especially in dentistry.
yeah.
Um, what do you think about the quote in leadership, that it is better to be feared than loved?
Uh, okay, so my thoughts about fear versus love. Um, I'm not going to say it's better to be feared than loved. Uh, there was a guy named Patrick Sweeney who he went through. He was a social psychologist around the time of 9/11, and I've done a story about this before on Instagram. But he was asked to go to Iraq and study the ability of soldiers and commanders to develop trust in that high stakes, stressful environment. And what he found was there were three things that contributed to trust. Right? He found that there was competency, character, and caring. So competency: do you know how to do what you need to do? Like, are you a master of your skill? Are you a master of your craft? Then the character: do you have character? Do you have integrity? And then caring. So I know how to do what I need to do. I'm a good person. And does this leader use those skills on me as a subordinate or as a team member? And then if you do those things, then it develops trust. That's what he found. But in their studies, what they found was the soldiers actually prioritized competency over or competence over caring or character. So the most important thing was for someone to be good at their job. And I feel like a lot of times people who throw their weight around to try to be feared rather than loved, they're trying to show that they're competent. But I think it comes from a place of insecurity. I heard one. I think it was a psychologist. I don't remember where I heard it and I can never find it, but they said that there are two types of relationships. You have relationships based on validation and relationships built on trust. And if you can focus on trust, that's why for me, it's the first pillar of my teach leadership model. If you can focus developing relationships on trust, you have a place to go. If you don't, then you're going to be so focused on your authority, right? So focused on trying to be feared rather than loved. And you're building like a shaky foundation because you're trying to build a relationship off of you being validated as a leader, not you building trust with somebody else. I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, it does. So what are some simple strategies for building trust among your team? Is it just
awesome.
authenticity and sticking to your word, or some more to it than that?
Sure. Yeah. So have you heard of Brene Brown? I
Yeah.
mean, in the leadership,
Hmm.
like, yeah, all that. She's great. And she has this framework called Braving, Braving. And when I came up with the teach leadership model, I mean, we've all had acronyms around us forever, but the Braving model for me was so pivotal that's the teach kind of came out of that. So Braving, she has the anatomy of trust, and she says you can tell what makes up trust based on what happens when it's broken, right? So if you go to the doctor, you got to know what's broken, what it's called, so you can fix it. So that's what she calls this anatomy of trust.
Hmm.
So braving is boundaries, reliability, accountability, something she calls the vault. So keeping confidences, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity. And so for me, the same way with teach, if you can break that down into things that you need to work on, with braving, you can break it down into how to build trust. So if you think about trust, not necessarily with what can I do to build it, but you can recognize it when it's broken, right? So when it's broken, how did it break? Was it because you didn't have boundaries set in place or someone didn't respect your boundaries? Was it because someone wasn't reliable? Was it because someone didn't hold themselves accountable or you weren't able to hold them accountable? They didn't take accountability for their actions. With the V, that's again the vault. So did they share something with someone that they weren't supposed to, that wasn't theirs to share? Do they have integrity? Do they approach you with non-judgment, or do they approach you with generosity, make generous assumptions of the things that you're doing? So for me, if you focus on those things, then you'll be able to develop trust much better. I was talking with Zach Shelley. He's an office manager and has a lot of really good ideas on being an office manager and being a leader in a dental practice.
Hmm.
And one of the things that he said, so that tactically, what does this look like in a practice? He said, I go around and I check in with people. I don't check on people. And for me, that was like perfect application of all of that. You develop trust, you give trust first, and then you're able to develop trust from that.
I like that a lot. Um, what do you think about I along the lines of like building trust and having consistency? I feel like with my experience with teams and reading about teams and podcasts and mentors, a big theme is that you have consistency. The way you treat someone is the way you treat someone else, and you're fair
Right.
across the board.
Yeah.
But I was watching a Michael Jordan documentary about the Chicago Bulls. I don't know if you watched it. It was called The Last Dance.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and did you watch it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So if you remember, there was a point when Phil Jackson was talking about like his coaching strategies, and he actually treated people very differently. So the way that he would treat Dennis Rodman, who was like always partying and late, was totally different than maybe he'd treat Michael Jordan or someone else on the team. I remember an example was everyone was supposed to show up training camp practice this time, this date to practice. And Dennis Rodman was like, I'm feeling overwhelmed right now. I can't come. I need to go to Vegas and blow off some steam. So he missed like the first 2 days, and everyone else like had to be there on time. And this guy got to skip out to go party. Then he showed up. Their team rapport was established, and they won the championship, and everything was great. But like he held a different standard for this one guy, and he had like a very individualized approach. So the way he treated Dennis Rodman, Michael Jordan, and like the 10 other guys, I feel like Phil Jackson gave them their, he was like consistent for them, but not consistent for the group. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So like
Yeah.
Dennis Rodman knew what to expect, Jordan knew what to expect, the other guy knew what to expect, but they all were going to get something different. So what are
Right.
your thoughts on treating everyone the same versus having a more individualized leadership approach, like per person, like different expectations per person versus
Yeah.
unified expectations for the team?
Yeah. I'm a fan of unified expectations, but I know that individuals need different attention. So I have three kids. I have a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, and next month a 4-year-old. And they each need something else, even though they're all my kids and my family has like a specific family culture on how we do things. I know that they each need something else in order to reach their potential, and people are the same thing. One of the things that I think is cool about leadership is you're dealing with people, and people are the ultimate puzzle.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, like growing up, I played a lot of video games, and I liked getting to a level where I could beat it. And over time, you get to a point where like it becomes not fun anymore because the puzzle, you can figure it out,
Because
right?
you're
The
so good
puzzles
at
become repetitive.
it.
Yeah. But with people, you could approach a person in a particular way, and you could approach the same person the exact same way, and it may not work another time. And
Hmm.
then you could approach a different person that same way, and it might work. So like there's always these variables on what's going to work with what's going to work with which person. And that's why people, for me, are the ultimate puzzle. And so you have to tailor your approach to the person, know your audience, know what you're trying to do. I think if you have an overarching consistency, then that's the most important thing. So in the 90-day development program, I talk about consistency in process and consistency in personality. So it's not just this is the way we do things, but it's also, does your team worry every time that they approach you about which version of you they're going to get that day, right? Are you the same person that they're going to approach? And I think as the leader, you hold that responsibility to be as consistent as possible in how you're treating them. But to more directly answer your question, I am a fan of more unified things, unified expectations. And I feel like especially in dentistry, we have to be so particular about how we do things that just because someone doesn't fall into the mold of what you want or what you're expecting from your practice doesn't mean that they won't fit in somewhere else. And I don't mean, like, a lot of times when we talk about letting somebody go or freeing them up to a new future, it seems like it's a euphemism for just firing them and letting them go. But I genuinely believe the leader's job is to raise people up to leave. And I hope that I can get a staff that's consistent. But we had like a lot of turnover for a while there. And it wasn't it was happening to let people go. And now we have someone who's leaving on really good terms. And we were having this discussion. She's getting emotional this week, talking about how sad she is to leave because she's got other things she has to pursue, and she's moving and things like that. And I told her, like, the job of the leader is to develop people to the point that they can move on, and that they choose to move on. But if you have to develop someone and they're not developing, then they need to move on because they need to find somebody or somewhere else to go, right? But if you help develop someone to the point where they believe in themselves, they're ambitious, they have other things going on, like, I hope that people that I work with can be inspired by the work that we do, to know that they can do more with their life if they want to, and that when they leave, like, that's a good thing. So I really went off the rails there on actually answering your question, but
No, that was
everybody
good.
needs something specific, and it's okay if people need to go somewhere else, is what I mean to say with that.
So on the topic of development of the staff,
Sure.
of the team, um, what are talk about the like growth and development, because in many industries,
Mhm.
many jobs, you hear like someone's I started at the bottom and worked my way to the top. In dentistry, there's like these barriers, like a hygienist can't work her way to the top and become the dentist.
Mhm.
So how do they still develop and feel like they're growing? How do you have your team feel like they're growing, becoming better, becoming more valuable, more skilled,
Yeah,
bettering their lives when they have the cap of you really can't work your way up to become the dentist unless
sure.
you
That is,
leave and start over and go to school?
yeah. I have my own answer for this, but I'm curious what you think as well. So I think there are two different things. There's onboarding and there's training, right? So a lot of people will have an onboarding process and they think that onboarding is the same as training, and it's really not. Onboarding is getting people just into the practice. Training is helping develop them after they've got the basic skills. So we work with at our practice, we've worked with the Team Training Institute. They have something that they teach called the 333. So for onboarding, what does someone need to know at the first 3 days, first 3 weeks, and first 3 months? I've also followed Mark Costas forever, the Dental Success Network and Dental Success Institute, and they use the black belt system for practices. So being able to quantify the development of a practice based on if it's blue belt, black belt, that kind of thing. So what I kind of blended those together. In our practice, we've developed the 333, so the onboarding process, but then every team member also has a black belt system. So they start off after they've done their onboarding. So after 3 months, they're a white belt. And with that white belt, for a certain period of time, they're working on their yellow belt skills. And so it's skills that allow them to take like the next step. And
Sure.
then after that, it's the blue belt. And then after that, it's the black belt. And then once he gets to the black belt, then it's, it's evolving not just skills of my position, but also cross training, being able to be a white belt in the other areas of other positions in the office. And then I was an Eagle, growing up an Eagle Scout, right?
Mhm.
So I remember doing an Eagle project and I wanted to bring that into this. So as part of that black belt, they have to do some project that's going to develop the practice and grow the practice to show they're contributing. So we give them not necessarily a career ladder, but these things that they can look forward to over a number of years in order to take their career to the next level. So as far as development goes, I think it's a constantly developing
Do you
thing.
pair like bonuses and raises with those, or is it just like job satisfaction?
Great question. As I am not the owner, that has not been tied in quite yet. And the program is still in its infancy where
Sure.
people are getting on board with that program. But that is the intention, so that if someone is looking for an increase, they know what it takes. You want to give someone an increase because they've brought more value to the practice. That's how you're able to pay them more. And so if you can tie that into that's the intention long term.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Cool. I think a lot of people believe that like with leadership you have it or you don't. Like it's a personality thing. Like a lot of people like lead from their gut, lead from their life experience. But I feel like from what I've seen following you is you almost believe in systematized leadership. Like I've seen all the checklists and the spreadsheets and the rubrics. So talk about the role of like systematizing the leadership skill and how that plays into what you do.
It's a good question. I never thought of that before. I feel like, can anyone be a leader? Yes, I believe they can, but I believe they need to want to. It's something that you can do all the little things, but if you're not doing it with a level of heart and passion, then it is just a checklist. So the last pillar of the teach leadership model is that H, the heart. I saw this Instagram reel where this pianist came up and he was showing this is playing music technically. And I think he was playing Clair de Lune or something. And he
Hmm.
was hitting all the notes exactly how they were on the sheet music. And then he said, this is playing musically. And he went back and put a lot of passion and
Hmm.
energy. He was pausing between the notes. He was holding some a little longer, getting some a little louder, that kind of thing. And both are correct, right? Like you can go through and establish trust, set expectations, hold people accountable, do that consistently. You can do all those things, but if you don't have that level of passion and that why behind your doing it, then it becomes the robotic. So can you do checklist leadership? Yes. Is it the type of leadership that I prefer and the type of leadership I'm trying to focus on? Not really. Does that answer your question? I'm not
It
sure.
does.
Yeah.
So how does one like cultivate that like passionate aspect of it? So let's say you've got like this dentist, he's like
Sure.
super awkward. He's like super awkward, super introverted.
Hmm.
He wants to be a better leader. So he like takes a leadership class, he gets all the checklists, he gets like the little
Sure.
course pack manual, but something's still not lining up. And it's because he's still really introverted, really awkward. Like how does a person like that fall into like a more natural feeling leadership in your experience?
Sure. There's this book called How to Lead When You're Not in Charge by this guy named Clay Scroggins.
Mhm.
And he talks about the first thing he says right off the bat is knowing your identity and knowing who you are really. And knowing yourself is key to tap into like, what is it? You know, if you're trying to be yourself, you have to know who you are as yourself. And it has to be authentic. You can't be trying to be somebody else or pretending to be somebody else. You can try to be the best version of yourself, right? You can try to improve and change how you approach people, but becoming very intimately familiar with who you are as a person and what your strengths and weaknesses are allows you to know how to show up for other people. I mean, a big part of leadership is delegating things. And if you don't know what your weaknesses are, you don't know what to delegate. So if you feel like you're shy and awkward and not charismatic, that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, people talk all the time about Abraham Lincoln and how he was, you know, a pretty shy guy and wasn't what you would call charismatic. But he was able to, you know, it's not what we would call charismatic because we think charisma is being a good speaker and getting out in front of people and being in the spotlight when really it's being able to have a sense of presence with other people. And if you can find a way to connect one-on-one with other people, I think that's the most important part. It's not necessarily being the center of attention, you know,
Mhm.
being not comfortable public speaking. I mean, that's totally fine, but it's being able to know how you can help influence other people and not influence them just because you're in charge, but influence them because they have some buy-in, because they believe in you as a person. And so getting people on your side one-on-one, I mean, you got to find out what works for you in order to develop those relationships. But I think knowing who you are first is, I think that's where to start.
I think that's a fantastic answer. I do like to keep these about a half an hour, and we're coming up
Sure.
right on there right now.
Perfect.
If someone wants to get in touch with you, they have any questions, they want some leadership advice, what's the best way to get in touch with you, Wes?
Sure. So Instagram is probably the best way. Dr.Wes Eggett. So it's Eggett. And then checking out the Leading in Dentistry podcast. I mean, you can download it anywhere that you find podcasts and look up leadingindentistry.com. Then you can see the course and stuff like that that's available there. But the best way is to reach out through Instagram. I'll always respond. Love making connections, love getting to know other people. I think that it's one of the things about dentistry is it can be a lonely profession. And I know that people have said that for a long time. And that's why Facebook groups are so big. It's becoming much and more and more less and less lonely and,
Yeah.
uh, and happy to respond, happy to talk with anybody. And it doesn't have to be dentist to dentist. Any position in the dental office, that's really where I want to focus my efforts as much as I can. Dentists have the resources to pay for coaching. So oftentimes it's dialed in for us. But I feel like every dentist wants their team to be full of leaders. And so that's where, if we can make a big difference there, that's where I'm focusing.
Fantastic. Wes, I want to thank you for your time. Great episode. For those of you listening, please support the podcast, subscribe to us on YouTube. If you are a dentist or dental student, please join the Practice Biopsy Facebook group, and we'll bring more content every week, every month, every year. We're going to keep this going. Thanks, Wes.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Anytime.